Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the journey to become a data-driven enterprise. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is William Schoeppner, Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates. Will is an accomplished information technology and business operations leader with more than 25 years of experience developing, managing, and leading business operations, integrated technology, and vendor management. Prior to joining EMA, he led strategy and performance for the Governor's Office of Information Technology as the Deputy Chief Strategy Officer. And before I hand things over to Will, I wanted the audience to know that he will be concluding today's event by taking your questions. Please feel free to log them anytime by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA with resources from today's event. So I hope you will check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Will Schoeppner. Will?
Thank you, Raleigh, for that warm welcome, and thank you everyone for joining. I am very excited to be here to talk about this research study, the journey to becoming a data-driven enterprise. And I also want to thank our sponsors, BMC, Control M, as well as NASTEL. Without them, this would not be possible. So throughout the study, we were able to see some pretty interesting findings across the board. And I'll go over many of them throughout this webinar. Some key things that we will see really will drive on how an enterprise becomes data-driven. And just a little bit of background when looking at the study, originally we wanted to look at when it comes to being data-driven in analytics for an enterprise, I'm looking at that 360 customer view, or really what does it take for an enterprise to have that cutting edge, to use analytics to really understand not only the needs of their customers, but the expectations. But we had to go through a journey ourselves. And this study went through its own journey to look at everything that makes up an organization when it comes to data analytics, really even long before they can become truly mature in using analytics to drive that customer perception, that customer viewpoint. So I will go over all that throughout this webinar, because it was a pretty interesting journey that we went through. But first, before I jump into the specifics of our research findings, just some demographic information. I know some of you guys like to see this. So overall, there was 152 qualified respondents that took the survey. The survey was also in the US, the UK, France, and Germany. And you can see the distribution between the US at 49% and in Europe at 51%. So pretty even across the board. And then also looking at company size, we looked at everything from small companies of 100 employees to 1,000, and the medium 1,000 to 10,000, and obviously large, everything larger than that. And that was also pretty evenly dispersed. We specifically did not look at companies that were under 100 employees, really those startups. And I will talk about that a little bit later, because they're very different in this journey. They are not as complex and do not have the complexity that a large company will have challenges when becoming data-driven. So we also wanted to look at industry across the board. And you can see here, there's a pretty even distribution on industry. We looked at areas of finance, banking, technology, manufacturing, professional services, retail, healthcare, and then there's this other group that were very small. So the ends would have been really just too small to pull out, but some of those things are like nonprofits, legal, some of those areas. Now with all of that out of the way, let's just jump right into the data and some of the findings that we saw during this research. So the first thing that I wanted to show is when we asked the participants about the strategy of being data-driven. So we wanted to really focus on that strategy, culture, and the perception within the organization. Do respondents feel that their organization has a strong strategy or a strong culture around being data-driven? And you can see here, only 41% of the respondents felt that their organizations had a fully integrated data-driven strategy within their companies. So that's not significant, and we would hope that that would be a little bit higher. And then when we look at company size, you can see that it's pretty much across the board that size really doesn't matter when it comes to having a fully data-driven strategy. And then the next thing, when you look at industry, we do start to see some differences. And one of the themes you will see throughout this webinar is really within retail services and professional services are more mature than others when it comes to being data-driven and having really a strategy, culture, and tool sets around being data-driven. So next, we asked, then how important do you think it is to be a data-driven organization? And not surprisingly, 92% of the respondents thought that it is important to be data-driven and have a strategy around being data-driven. So this really is interesting when it comes to looking at that understanding and the perception. And then hopefully eventually what we could do is having a research study that looks at the actuals and working with companies to understand really how they're made up and looking at their strategies, looking at their cultures, and getting actually into those companies and comparing perception to really that reality within the organization and looking at their analytics would be really interesting to carry on later on. But I do want to state a lot of these questions here in the first part is about that perception. And then on the other part of this slide, on the right side of the graph, you could see how is your organization's culture when it comes to being data-driven. And again, people feel that the culture is pretty significant. 82% when we combine very data-driven and extremely data-driven are saying that they actually have culture. Their organizations has a culture, I should say, around being data-driven. So that's great to see. And other things that we'll see within this presentation, that leadership is focused on being data-driven. And we're seeing, obviously, with the changes in the world over the last 2 years, that digital transformation initiatives that companies have been embarked on had to speed up rapidly. Really how we're touching our customers is a lot more digital than before, and a lot more remote. So it's great to see within this data that companies at least have that focus, and leadership is engaged and committed to being data-driven across the board. And forgive me, my slides kind of moved around on me. So this slide really gets back to that last slide a little bit around what makes up a mature data-driven. And when we ask really, where do you feel your company is most mature? And it gets back to where I was saying that executive leadership really is one of the most mature areas that we're seeing, but also culture. So that's very promising. One thing that to note on the slide, though, that I thought was interesting was if you look at the very right, one of the areas that respondents was feeling that they're more mature was around data analytics being predictive and proactive. And to me, that was actually surprising. there's a lot of growth within this space and also a lot of improvements over the last few years. And we're seeing this continue to mature across the board. But I would say that we're seeing within the industry that there's even more room for growth and maturity. So surprising me that respondents feel that this is one of the areas of maturity within their organization. So next we wanted to look at really then specifically about availability of data. And when folks need data to make business decisions, is it there when they need it? So when we ask respondents, is the data there when you need it, as you need it? And you can see only 43% of the respondents stated that data is available when they need it. Excuse me. And then on the other graph next to this, you can see that, which was even more telling, when you have a data request from an internal teams, how quickly is that fulfilled? So your SLAs and your OLAs, how quickly are data requests being driven within an organization? And only 36% of the respondents said that data requests are filled within a day. And 51% said within a few days. So obviously there's room for growth when it comes to being able to drive data requests in the organization. I'm getting used to the WebEx, so bear with me. It's a little goofy on going through the slides. So next, we want to look at priorities within the organization. And this really gets to be key to see where our organization is focusing in the future. What are the key things that organizations are looking at within their data-driven strategies? And then later on in this part, we will also cover what are organizations looking at within their tool sets when it comes to being data-driven. So when looking at overall with an organization, both within their strategy, their culture, and their tool sets, we wanted to look at to see where are their gaps and where can organizations improve. And this data point was actually really promising to see that across the board, organizations are focused on improving gaps, specifically leadership really is focused on fixing gaps within in data availability. So from that previous slide that we saw, obviously there are some significant gaps, but in this slide shows that 91%, so if we combine the agree and strongly agree, 91% are saying that leadership is committed to resolving those gaps as quickly as possible. So next we'll look at industry, because there's some pretty telling things both within industry, and there's only so much time within this webinar, but there's also a lot of interesting points that we saw within region as well when we compared US versus Europe. But specifically within industry, you can see when we ask, how is your organization's culture when it comes to be data-driven? Retail, professional services, finance, banking, really are those top tier areas that are more mature than some of the other industries that we're seeing. And then also when we ask, how often does your data inform your business decisions, which is really critical. Again, those same areas of retail, finance, banking, and professional services stand out. One thing that I want to note on this slide, when we look at something, when I see something that's 100%, so in this case, that N for retail distribution, I believe that was 30 respondents. So every respondent within the retail distribution group felt that business decisions are really being informed by data, which was really great to see. And then getting back to that similar question before of how available is data when you need it, across the board, there was gaps, but when we look at individual services, this is a little bit more telling. So you can see again that professional services at 100%, retail very close, and financial banking, all of them really, really high within this category. And next, we'll look at trends and use cases. And this is where really some of the more interesting findings come out within the data. So we wanted to look at specifically what was the primary driver for being data-driven, and what are the business cases for being data-driven, and where are they seeing the most benefit for being for using analytics for their decision-making. And you can see here when we ask that question about what was that primary driver for your data-driven execution strategy, improve operational performance and efficiencies are top of the list across the board. And then not surprisingly, where we even started with this research study, looking at the customer, so staying ahead of competition and customer experience that follow. And then on the other side, you can see for data analytic trends, we asked what was number one importance. We gave them a list of data analytical trends, and we asked them to rate them in importance from very top to least. The number one importance within those trends was increased automation and workflow. And we will see this actually, I think, in the next slide as well, that this is very telling, where automation really is the key across the board. And I talk about some of the challenges that we're seeing across the world in the last couple of years, and organizations have had to do more with less. They have to get faster. They have to be mindful of resources. And really, one of the biggest takeaways of this research study was, in order to be data-driven and really have an impact to your strategy across the board as a business and your operational side, automation at all levels, especially with your IT teams and your operational teams, is so critical and cannot be understated. And then when we asked organizations, where do you plan on having funding in the next year, looking at those trends, where are you planning on investing? Again, the key thing that came across in the data sets was around automation and workflows. That is the number one area that companies said that they were planning on investing in. Next would be customer experience and analytics, self-service, BI analytics, data storing. Those are some of the top list after that. So I know this graph here could be a little bit of an eye chart, so I apologize, but it has some pretty telling information in it. So if you look at the orange bars, that's stating when we ask, which of the following IT operation activities benefit most from being data-driven? And also, I should stay within this graph and the next couple of others, we asked respondents that specifically had a knowledge of IT operations. So the N for this drops down to about 117 from the original 152. So but it focuses on individuals that really had knowledge and specific dealings within these areas. So you can see improved efficiency, cloud analytics, monitoring, quality assurance. Those are some of those key areas that organizations are currently seeing a benefit for being data-driven and having a strategy around being data-driven. But next, the purple bars is really where it gets interesting. Purple bars is showing where do individuals think that they're going to see the most benefit in these trends that around data analytics over the next 12 to 24 months. And within here, you're starting to see areas like security, IoT, and automation, some of these areas start to come out, and you're going to see start to have more of a benefit in the next 12 to 24 months. And to go with that, then the next question we asked was, where do you plan on having a budget assigned, and where do you plan on investing in the next 12 to 24 months? And you can see, and combined with the last graph, that becomes a lot more telling and a lot easier to see that security, intelligence, improved efficiency, monitoring, cloud analytics, self-service, these are really the top of, and then IoT, those are the top of the list on where companies are focused on. What are they thinking about? Where are they planning? And what are they looking at investing in the next coming year to 2 years? So next, we're going to look at trends in technology, tools, and products. And I should say, so this next section, so before we've been talking about really overall of the company and their strategy, their culture, their makeup. Next, we're going to talk specifically about the products and tools that the companies are looking at and they're using. So when we ask, what is the frequency does your organization review data-driven analytic tools? One of the more surprising stats that I saw within the study, when I was talking to some of our sponsors, and we had some pretty interesting discussions on this, that 46% of the respondents stated that they're reviewing their analytic tools every 6 months to a year. And when I'm trying to unwrap this and understanding why there's such a huge frequency within reviewing tools, it's just because there's such a rapid change right now. When we look at just the complexity of the environments that organizations are in right now, with having multi-hybrid, complex environments, having their platforms both on-prem, off-prem, multi-clouds, it's incredibly complicated and complex world that people are seeing. And organizations are trying to find the best fit for the tools to have their resources as productive and efficient as possible. So when we start really unwrapping this actually turned out to not be that surprising, understanding what's going on in today's world and understanding that our developers, our engineers, our DevOps folks are really looking for that best solution out there to help them overcome some of these complexities. And then on the next side of this graph, we ask, which of the following indicators are the primary reasons for selecting the data analytic products that you use today? I should say, not surprising, security features being on the top of the list. That's kind of what we would hope to see. But then some of the other ones, like ease of management, scalability, features that improve customer service, even within delivering IT services, are really those top areas. So again, then we try to always look at looking out future. And in this question, where are you planning on looking at? So what is your organization looking for in an IT operations data-driven tool set to be successful? When they're reviewing their tools at that every 6 months to less than a year, what are they really looking for within their tools? What are they looking for when I'm talking about that efficiency and streamlining operations? You can see the top of the list is that ease of use. Next is that workflow automation. So that theme that we're seeing across the board in this study and in this data, that automation is key, and organizations, as part of their data-driven strategy, are really understanding that you really have to have a strategy around automation and workflows in order to be successful if your data-driven strategy is going to really drive that change that you're looking for within your customers, your end of sales, and staying ahead and getting that competitive edge with your competition. The other things that we're seeing is ability to query data. Transparency of data is always really high. Data visualization, data dashboards, and then affordability, of course, is also very key. So next, we want to look at what was the benefits of being data driven. So we have all of this information on really of the organization and the products and the tools and where organizations are driving their strategies, but we wanted to see what are the key benefits are they really seeing from being data driven. And you can see the top number one benefit across the board is really improved efficiency. That is by far when we ask overall, what is the best benefit? And then cloud analytics, IoT, workload automation, security intelligence, those all then top of the list. And then lastly, and I believe this is my last graph, we just wanted to throw a question in there that asks, what are the challenges of not having a data-driven strategy? These are kind of things that we know, but it also really just helps to see this in the data sets, that decisions are slow to happen and decisions are inconsistent. So when an organization fails to have a strong strategy and culture around being data-driven and really focusing on the three pillars of really that process, structure, and then tools around your strategy, regardless of what it is, but in this case, being data-driven, using data analytics to drive business decisions, you can see where the organization is going to have the biggest gaps. And that is really around those decisions are inconsistent and slow. So just to kind of recap and summarize overall, so the three main points out of this research study that we were seeing is one, top-down support at all levels and culture are key to be data-driven, to any data-driven strategy. And fortunately, what we're seeing in the data sets that organizations and specifically that the leadership within companies truly are driven to have a strategy around data analytics to drive business decisions. So this was really, really great to see and encouraging across the board. Next, I just briefly hit on it, and I probably should hit on this so much more, just the complexity that we're seeing in today's environment of a hybrid multi-cloud world. It's not making things easier. It's getting more complex. It's getting more complicated. And really, anything that companies can find to make things easier, to streamline, whether it's using automation for your workflows, finding the best solutions is really going to make that difference. And without having that automation and workflow within your overall strategy and understanding, really that's where it begins, just exactly where I talked about with this research, where we tried looking at really the end goal and realized we really need to back up and look at overall the IT operations and the structure of organizations and really understand why an organization can be data-driven. And that really drove the title to this overall webinar, that it truly is a journey. It was a journey doing this research study, and it was a journey for companies to become data-driven. And it really starts at all levels within the organization. And then lastly, workflow orchestration is key to any strategic decision required to achieve efficiency and improved operations, as the data was showing. So with that, I will love to hand it back over to Raleigh to open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you, Will. If you have questions, you can log them now using the Q&A functionality. I also wanted to invite everyone to learn more about the research report. I will include a link to learn more about it in the follow-up email. Will, jumping into the questions, what are key characteristics you are seeing that make an organization more mature in being data-driven?
Yeah, thank you, Raleigh, and thank you for the person that asked that question. I would say kind of really some of the key characteristics is having that strong strategy, but also being able to handle the complexity. So I mentioned early on that we didn't survey companies that were 100 or less because we're realizing maturity doesn't really mean age of the company or really how long the company's been around, because startups are able to have everything in one platform or a more concise area, where companies that have been around for a longer time or larger companies are dealing with on-prem, multi-hybrid cloud environments, and just adding to that complexity. So, which is a really interesting question, because that makeup isn't what you really would think about when it comes to maturity. It doesn't mean age. It could mean that startups have it easier. It could mean companies that have a longer strategy, even newer companies that have been founded and built on a culture and strategy around data can be a lot more data-driven and farther along in this journey than maybe a Fortune 500 company.
Great insights. Thank you, Will. The next question is, where do you see trends in how data analytics will be used in the next 24 months? Did your research shed any light on that?
Yeah, I think so. So I think, and again, thank you for the question. So what we're seeing really with this, and we're going to do for future research in this as well, because this study only touched on it a little bit, but what we're seeing within data analytics, and if you remember very beginning there was one little bullet point that companies felt that they were mature around being proactive and reactive when it comes to analytics. I think over the next, even what we're seeing today, but over the next 12 to 24 months, that increase in AI and ML being used within analytics to really be predictive and proactive is really going to be that key. So when we talk about automation, that's really critical, but when we add in being able to be proactive in remediating events and using AI and ML to be able to really drive that is really going to be the game changer that I see is going to be happening or will continue to happen in the next 12 to 24 months.
Good to know. Thank you, Will. What has been some of the key external influences pushing organizations to be more data-driven?
Yeah, thank you. And another good question, because a lot of times we look at internal influences, whether it's, and I know a lot of the study all talk about the internal influences, like the leadership, the culture, the strategy, where budgets being planned for the next 12 to 24 months, but there's always external influences as well. And I think really what we're seeing with the pandemic and the changes within the world over the last couple of years, companies were already embarking on digital transformation, but we're seeing that has sped up significantly with influences across the board. More people being remote, their customers are being engaged more in a digital format. So whenever this change as far as digital transformation happens, analytics is really that key driver. So companies have had to speed up their digital transformation plans, no longer as being able to do them as they can. Now they're the forefront to the main strategy within organizations.
Thank you, Will. How important is getting data from the integration infrastructure layer to being data-driven?
Oh, I love that question. It's really important. It gets back to why I think when we looked at some of the data sets that you saw, like automation workflows were so key. And it gets back to also where I was saying originally, for me being a former strategy officer, looking at that customer and realizing that wasn't where we needed to begin, that we really need to be looking at that infrastructure layer and the IT operations teams, because really, to me, that's the key. And if that isn't where your strategy starts, then you're not going to be successful. So you really have to work at that layer and have that analytics and information being driven from there all the way cascaded up. I can't stress the importance of having that analytics and data moved all the way up, which is also kind of, if I could just add one other thing to that, it's why I think where AI is going to be really important as well, because those teams are so inundated with data as far as events and everything that they're looking at, that it is just overwhelming. And it's one of the areas that organizations really need to focus and have a key strategy on in order for those teams to be successful.
Excellent. Thank you, Will, for all those great insights. And I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. As I mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA that will include resources from today's event. So I hope you will check that email out. And I hope that we will see you at a future EMA Research webinar. Thank you again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.